Hi, I don't want to sound like a broken record because I've probably the bulk of my videos recently have been about the recent events, but there are issues that need to be looked at, and I've kind of on and off watched the GB News segments on the riots, and I have to say I'm disgusted by GB News. Disgusted. Um, I think that what they have done is basically engage in a sort of apologia for the rioters, and I'm disgusted by that. Um, they've just had a video about 2.5 minutes long and big block capitals. Jeremy Clarkson rages at Keir Starmer. Um, there's so much distortion going on here in terms of what these riots have actually involved. I am sick and tired of the right, and it is the right, trying to say that they're just fed up citizens. They're thugs. Okay, and the majority haven't been peaceful. The majority have been violent and riotous. They've been throwing things at the police. They've been trashing businesses. They've been terrorising minorities. I've seen very little so-called peaceful protest. I'm not going to say it's non-existent, but I've seen very little of it. And for what? Because 3 little girls were horribly murdered in Southport. A terrible, evil crime. And I hope the perpetrator gets life behind bars. But what happened after that? False information was spread that he was a Syrian refugee. And the specific riots that have happened all over the country, it's fair to say they're not all directly related to false information on Southport, but there has been a trigger effect whereby, or I should say a domino effect, whereby it's kind of being used as an excuse, I think, for people who say that they're fed up with the situation regarding illegal immigration, and it's exploded. But I do think that GB News' coverage of this has been a disgrace. Now, they're careful about it. They're not going to come out and say, I support a fag breaking a window, right? They're not stupid. But what they have done is tried to normalise them as just fed up normal citizens. I've always said that it's important to call out ideologies very clearly and honestly. I've always said, for example, it's important to call out Islamist ideology by name. Well, is the term far-right extremism being exaggerated in this context? I'm not sure that it is, because if you look at the nature of these riots, there's absolutely, unquestionably, a far-right component to it. Unquestionably. Groups like Patriotic Alternative have clearly had the grubby fingers involved in it. So this notion that they're only a little side component, they're not significant, is delusional, and it's dishonest. And I think for journalists to be engaging in that dishonesty is a disgrace. I've long felt that GB News is sort of the media wing of the Reform Party, because it's not that they swing to the right, it's that the way they talk about reform and the way they talk about other parties is striking. Now, you could argue that all media outlets have bias, and God knows this video is not about defending the BBC. I've made other videos where I'm attacking the BBC. I'm also well aware that by making this video, I may well put up a barrier to ever appearing on GB News, if I go further in my journalism. But I have to be honest, I can't just self-censor because, I better not say that in case I'm never invited on the show. I'm calling it out for what it is. I'm sick and tired of GB News presenters like Bev Turner and Neil Oliver present these rioters as just normal citizens. Normal people don't go out and burn a stranger's car. Normal people don't throw a brick through an Asian family's window or target Filipinos who finish a shift, as what happened in my city. Um, and again, they're not openly defending them. They're not saying I agree with what they're doing. They say, I don't support it. They always put that little caveat because they're not stupid. But I do think they're engaging in a sort of apology here by presenting these rioting thugs, these racist thugs, as normal citizens. I'm disgusted by it. How much influence does GB News have? I don't know. It's hard to say. I think they're good at getting clickbait. They're a bit like Fox News in that sense. Fox News used to have, I'm sure it still does, big glaring, booming headlines. It's very shouty. Absolutely, GB News is Britain's Fox News. It's shouty. It goes for sensationalism over substance. I'm not going to say that absolutely everything they've covered is wrong. There's been times I've found myself in agreement with some of the issues they raise. And it is useful to have a network that covers issues like divisive identity politics and woke zealotry, etc. I don't like those things, you know. I do not like the extremes of the left. And GB News has covered that. But what's happened in these riots, I'm just so disgusted by the way GB News has approached it. Um, how hard is it to just condemn criminality? How hard is it to say yes, there's legitimate concerns here, but there's no excuse for what they're doing? They seem to struggle to even do that. And again, it's not like they're not saying we support the violence, um, but they're grudgingly sort of saying, "Oh well, I don't support that." But it is grudging, and it's just like a kind of dismissive thing, like they say it as a cover. As for Jeremy Clarkson, he's a TV presenter, he's unelected. Why does his opinion matter so much? I mean, who is he? He's a former Top Gear presenter. What makes him qualified to talk about this issue? You know, why is it celebrities are held up? And the left do the same thing, incidentally, as some sort of, like having some sort of monopoly on right and wrong. I say that everyone is entitled to their opinion, everyone. But let's stop holding up celebrities as if their opinion should matter more than others. But what makes me particularly angry about this is the normalisation of rioters. I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you cross a line and you start engaging in criminality, you don't deserve any respect. I don't care what you're angry about. I don't care what the cause is. That's crossing a line and it focuses on the wrong people. Now, I can understand anger about, say, the failures of social services or illegal immigration. I'm not saying people shouldn't be angry. Not at all. But what I have a big problem with is this normalization of far right thuggery. And I'm calling it far right, that's what it is. Because when you have groups like Patriotic Alternative involved, they're a bunch of neo Nazis. Blood and soil nationalism is a very ugly thing. Where that gets influenced, minorities are put at risk. I will never support it, and I will never apologise for calling it out. Does that mean that absolutely everyone who's been rioting is, you know, a racist? Not necessarily, but I think a lot of them are, and that's plain to see. So the denialism that GB News is engaging in is pathetic. It's an echo chamber, of course, because it will attract people who say it's all part of the deep state. Starmer's a traitor. You know, Labour's going to flood the country with refugees, etc. Um, I've got my issues with Labour. There's plenty of ground to criticise, but if you look at GB News, I think it's an echo chamber. For all the faults the BBC has, if you look at a BBC comment thread, it's a little bit more balanced. You get people criticising the BBC, but you get people agreeing with the segments as well. With GB News, it's just like a bunch of reform members, you know, in unison agreeing with them. That's honestly the impression I get. And again, I'll repeat this, it's an important point. No, I do not think reform members are racist individually. I don't believe that. And I think it would be wrong to vilify them as such. But I don't like reform as a party. I do not like Nigel Farage. I don't trust Nigel Farage. And I think GB News, you know, they've acted like the media wing of reform. They basically, I've never seen GB News criticise Farage or other reform people. You know, that's telling. Um, I mean, the BBC has many faults, but I don't think you could say honestly, objectively, that it panders to any party in the same way. It has its faults, it has biases for sure, but I really don't think that's the case. The BBC's faults are its arrogance. The Hugh Edwards scandal is an example of that. Um, and I think the licence P thing's a disgrace. And I'm not surprised that GB News has gained traction because it does fill a few voids that mainstream media will not talk about. I mean, when the BBC news presenter, I can't remember what her name was, but the anchor woman cut off the police constable, or the former police chief, I should say, in an interview because he was raising the issue of an army officer who'd been stabbed. That is just bad optics. You know, don't cut off someone if you've invited them for an interview. It's just, I think the BBC needs to explain that. Um, but I'm sick and tired of GB News putting out this narrative that somehow the rioters are the victims rather than the people they've been targeting. I'm disgusted by it. Um, if someone's smashing a rock through an Asian family's home, they're not a victim, they're a thug, and they belong in prison. Um, we've seen a lot of distortion going on regarding this. I mean, the thing about, online activity, again, if someone's inciting violence, that is very, very different from just having an offensive opinion. I think the latter should be protected, incidentally. And I've long argued that there is issues around hate crime legislation, absolutely. Starmer needs to do a lot more to reassure the public that he does support free speech and his party, because I think there is mistrust of Labour on this issue. I think the way that hate crime legislation is drafted and worded is concerning. I think it's far too broad reaching, for sure. But in these particular riots, people are getting jailed for inciting violence. That is not the same as just holding a controversial viewpoint. It's not. If someone is saying to their followers, go and burn a hotel that has people in it, human beings inside it, that is absolutely not a small thing. It's not just words. It can have real world implications. GB News seems to think it's just free speech. Um, Now, I don't want to exaggerate their influence. I suspect probably they're not as influential as what might appear by their shouty clickbait. But I think, if they need to say what are we doing here? Are we serving as a mouthpiece for the Reform Party? Are we being an objective news channel? Are we pushing a right wing agenda? Because I think they're doing all of those things. Um, and that's fine. Channel 4 News arguably pushes a left wing agenda. So I'm not saying GB News is unique to it, but what I find really, really galling is them normalising criminals as just concerned, angry citizens. That isn't gaslighting the public, because the vast majority of the public are not doing that. As for labelling people far right, well, if someone is blatantly engaging in racist behaviour, they should be labelled far right, because that's what they are. No different than an extremist Muslim who is proselytising about wanting Sharia law, etc., i.e., an Islamist. I call them out by name as well. I think the right is guilty of downplaying far right extremism. I think they're guilty of implying that this is just some little small problem that doesn't exist, or it's been exaggerated. I don't think it is. I think what's happened, I think certainly, for example, platforms like Telegram has stoked things up. Like I mentioned earlier, I think Elon Musk is guilty of stoking things up. Um, I'd love to see Telegram blocked in this country. I'm not sure what the legal status of that is, but if it is available, it's a mouthpiece from Russia. Why is it operating here? I mean, it's being used to spread disinformation, so why is it just getting a free rein? That needs to be looked at, because you could be absolutely sure the Kremlin will be, I mean, frankly, right now they're too busy with what's going on in Kursk, but on the sidelines they'll be looking at this. Um, the good news is the worst is over, and without wanting to be too negative in this video, I'm well aware that there are millions and millions and millions of people out there who reject what's been happening, and GB News does not speak for them. The arrogance of GB News to think they alone represent all British people. Incidentally, if they're so patriotic, why is it not UK News? A bit like the Team GB in the Olympics, it should be Team UK. Why exclude Northern Ireland, GB News, if you're so patriotic? Um, I'm going to conclude. I'm not saying in this video that I disagree with everything they come out with. I'm not saying that they haven't touched on valid subjects over the years, because they have. And I do think it's important that there is a news network that covers issues that the BBC and Sky won't cover. But the way they have approached these riots, presenting criminals and rioters as just normal people who are fed up, I am totally disgusted by that. I think it's bad journalism. I think it's disingenuous to the reality of what's been happening. And, you just have to look at comments. People saying things like, oh, it's not racist to want your country back. Well, what does that mean? Want your country back from hardworking Indian and Filipino medical people? Is that what you're talking about? Want your country back from illegal immigration? Fair enough. So say so. Talk about that. But these sort of sweeping statements about around patriotism. Like, I've seen things like there was an 18-year-old throwing rocks at the police, and people say, "Oh, it's wrong. He's being arrested, a white kid, because he cares about the deaths of white kids." No, he's just an opportunist criminal who wants to throw rocks at the police. Incidentally, when he was apprehended, he was whining about it. He claimed he was only a child. He's man enough to do that, but when he gets caught, he cries about it. Um, that's how I feel about GB News right now. I mean, I probably should avoid it, but it's depressing because there are a lot of people that up. Um, because the issue here is not about people raising concerns around illegal immigration or any of those issues. It's about normalizing rioters. That is what I think is unacceptable. They don't deserve to be normalized. And as for anger, well, guess what? I feel extremely angry about quite a number of issues, but I don't go out and engage in criminality. So there's no excuse, none. Um, and I say to the GB News staff, you people don't have a monopoly on anger and outrage. So don't think that you do. And don't think that you alone represent the British people. How arrogant, you don't.